People think of dementia and neurodegenerative disease as an older person's disease, and it's not.
We used to joke and call it old-timers disease.
But I get it, because we see people with dementia and they're older, right? But these diseases start silently in people's 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s and 70s, decades before symptoms. And there are 47 million Americans and hundreds of millions of people globally.
Most people think dementia sneaks up on you in your 70s. A gradual fading, a slow dimming of the lights, something that happens to other people much later, much further down the road. But that is not how it works. The damage starts quietly, silently, sometimes 20 years before a single symptom ever appears. And most people are already feeding it every single day without knowing. That is the part nobody tells you. We talk about dementia like it is a verdict handed down in old age, like it arrives one morning and announces itself. But the truth is far more unsettling than that. The truth is that the brain does not fail overnight. It erodes, slowly, consistently, over decades of tiny moments that nobody notices, not even the person it is happening to. And here is what makes it worse. Of all the things people fear about getting older, dementia sits at the very top of that list. Not heart disease, not cancer, dementia, because this one does not just take your body, takes your memories, takes your personality. It takes the version of you that your family has known their entire lives. The slow erasure of a person while they are still physically present is something that is genuinely hard to put into words. I have seen it, and I will tell you honestly, it is one of the hardest things to witness. That fear is completely rational. But here is what I want you to hold on to as we go through this together. That fear does not have to be the end of the conversation. Because the science right now, the real peer-reviewed evidence, not wellness blogs, not supplement companies, actual clinical research, is telling us something extraordinary. It is telling us that dementia is not inevitable. That the brain, like the heart, like the liver, like every other organ in your body, responds to the way you live. And that some of the most powerful protective tools available to you right now cost almost nothing, take less than 10 minutes each, and most doctors will never once bring them up in a routine appointment. For habits, that is what we are talking about today. For small, evidence-based daily habits that target the exact biological processes driving dementia at its root. Not after it appears, before it ever gets the chance to start. Hi viewers, have you ever had a moment where you forgot something simple? A name? A word? Where you left your keys and felt a quiet flicker of fear about what it might mean? I want you to think about that for a second, because that quiet flicker, that tiny moment of worry, is exactly why this conversation matters. Now, before we get into the habits themselves, I need to tell you something about how dementia actually develops. Because once you understand the mechanics of it, once you see the 4 underlying processes driving it forward, everything that follows is going to make complete sense. And more importantly, it is going to feel genuinely doable rather than overwhelming. The brain is the most energetically expensive organ in your entire body. It makes up roughly 2% of your body weight and consumes around 20% of your total energy. It is running constantly. It never clocks off. And to do that, it depends on an uninterrupted, generous supply of oxygenated blood delivered through a vast and delicate network of blood vessels. When that network is healthy, the brain thrives. When it starts to fail, quietly, gradually, almost invisibly, the consequences are enormous. And the thing that most people do not realize is this. The same forces that damage your heart are damaging your brain at exactly the same time. Poor blood vessel health, blood sugar instability, chronic inflammation, declining cardiovascular fitness. These are not separate problems for separate specialists. They are one connected system. And dementia, it turns out, is largely a disease of that system, which means the same daily choices that protect your heart are protecting your brain too. That changes everything about how we should be thinking about this. Because we are not talking about exotic interventions or expensive treatments. We are talking about the basic daily inputs your body receives, the movement, the food, the tiny biological signals you send every single hour of every single day. And right now, for most people living in the modern world, those signals are working against the brain rather than for it. But that can change. And it can change starting today. Now, I do need to be upfront about one thing before we go further. The 4th habit on this list is the one that surprises people the most. The first time I came across the research on it, I genuinely thought I had misread it. I went back, I checked again, and then I checked a third time, Because it connects something most of us do every single morning to one of the most feared brain diseases on the planet. And the link, once you see it, is very hard to unsee. Stay with me. So let me walk you through the biology first, because this is the part that changes how you see everything else. The brain does not just switch off one day. It declines through 4 specific, measurable biological processes that build up over years. And understanding them is the difference between feeling helpless about dementia and feeling genuinely equipped to fight it. The first one is blood vessel health. Your brain is fed by an extraordinarily dense and delicate network of blood vessels. And when those vessels become stiff, narrowed, or inflamed, the brain gets less of everything it needs. Less oxygen, less glucose, less of the constant supply it depends on to function properly. That slow starvation, repeated daily over decades, is one of the earliest and most consistent drivers of cognitive decline. The second process is insulin resistance. This one surprises people. Most of us think of insulin as a diabetes issue, pancreas issue, something that affects your blood sugar and not much else. But the brain has its own insulin signaling system. And when that system breaks down, when brain cells stop responding properly to insulin, they lose access to their primary fuel source. They begin to starve from the inside. The damage accumulates. And scientists have now documented this connection so consistently that many researchers refer to Alzheimer's disease as type 3 diabetes. Let that land for a moment. Type 3 diabetes. Not because it is caused by sugar in the simplistic way people assume, but because the same fundamental breakdown in insulin signaling that drives type 2 diabetes in the body appears to drive neurodegeneration in the brain. That is not a fringe theory. That is published, peer-reviewed science discussed in leading neurology journals. The third process is chronic low-grade inflammation. Not the inflammation you feel after you twist your ankle. Not the acute, visible kind. This is the silent kind. The kind that produces no obvious symptoms. A slow, smoldering fire running through your body that you cannot feel but that your blood vessels absolutely feel. Chronic inflammation damages the inner lining of blood vessels, including the tiny ones threading through your brain. It makes them fragile. It makes them vulnerable. And over time, it quietly accelerates exactly the kind of structural damage that shows up decades later as memory loss and cognitive decline. The fourth process is cardiovascular fitness. This one ties everything together. Your overall fitness level determines how efficiently oxygenated blood is delivered to your brain across your entire lifetime. People with higher cardiovascular fitness have better preserved brain volume, better cognitive function in later life, and significantly lower rates of dementia. This is not a correlation built on one small study. This is one of the most replicated findings in brain health research across the last 30 years. For processes, for targets, and every single habit we are about to talk about works on at least one of them. Some work on 2. Some work on 3 simultaneously. That is exactly why these small daily choices carry so much weight over a lifetime. You are not powerless here. That is the message. Now let us get into the habits. I want to start with one you almost certainly walked past this morning without giving it a second thought. Stairs. That is the first habit. Taking the stairs and taking them hard whenever you have the option. Now before you move on, before your brain files this under obvious advice you have heard 100 times, stay with me. Because the way this works in the body is far more specific and far more powerful than most people realize. Researchers have given this type of movement a name. They call it VILPA, Vigorous Intermittent Lifestyle Physical Activity. It sounds technical, but the concept is straightforward. These are short, deliberate bursts of genuine effort scattered throughout your normal day. Not formal gym sessions. Not a 45-minute jog. Just brief moments of real physical intensity woven into the hours you are already living. And the evidence behind VILPA is remarkable for how little time it actually requires. Here is the math that stopped me in my tracks when I first read it. 1 extra flight of stairs taken hard, maybe 30 seconds of real effort, done once every day, adds up to roughly 3 to 4 hours of vigorous cardiovascular activity across a single year. 3 to 4 hours. From 30 seconds a day. Without a gym membership. Without a changed schedule. Without a single minute of formal exercise added to your life. Multiply that across 10 years. You have quietly banked the equivalent of weeks of cardiovascular training in increments so small you never once felt the weight of them. Now here is exactly why this matters for your brain. When you push hard on those stairs, your heart rate climbs. Your cardiovascular system gets a genuine workout. And over time, consistent bouts of intensity like this improve the flexibility and responsiveness of your blood vessels, including the small, delicate vessels inside your brain. They stay open. They stay elastic. They keep delivering what the brain needs year after year, decade after decade. On top of that, short bursts of vigorous movement sharpen your insulin sensitivity directly. Your muscles become more efficient at pulling glucose out of your bloodstream and using it as fuel, which means lower blood sugar spikes, less insulin required, less metabolic stress building up in the brain over time. One habit, 2 of the 4 brain risk drivers. Every single day. If you already use stairs regularly, push further. Next time you reach the bottom, go back up again immediately. 1 extra rep. Taken fast. That is it. That small addition, repeated daily, is doing genuine, measurable work for your brain over the long run. Now the second habit is one where the research genuinely stunned me. Because if a pharmaceutical company had produced these results in a clinical trial, it would have been front-page news worldwide. But because the answer turned out to be something you can buy in any supermarket for a few dollars, the story never quite got the attention it deserved. A small handful of nuts. Every single day. The strongest evidence here comes from a landmark clinical trial called Predimed. This was a large, rigorously designed randomized controlled trial, the gold standard of medical research, involving thousands of older adults at elevated cardiovascular risk. Participants were divided into 3 groups. One group followed a Mediterranean diet supplemented with extra virgin olive oil. A second group followed that same diet supplemented with a daily handful of mixed nuts. A third group followed a standard low-fat control diet. The trial was stopped early. Not because of harm. Because the benefits in the Mediterranean diet groups were so clear and so consistent that the ethics committee determined it would be wrong to keep the control group from accessing the same dietary pattern. And within the follow-up data from this trial, something stood out specifically about the nut group. They performed measurably better on cognitive testing than the controls. Across multiple assessments. Consistently. A handful of nuts. Every day. Now why does this work? What is actually happening inside the body when you eat a small amount of nuts regularly? The answer comes down to a combination that is genuinely rare in the modern food environment. Healthy fat, protein, and fiber all arriving together in the same small package. And those 3 things together do something that refined, processed food almost never does. They slow the rise of blood sugar. They fill you up properly. They tell your brain that real, substantial fuel has arrived. Compare that to a biscuit or a handful of crisps. Those spike your blood sugar fast, deliver a brief sense of fullness, and leave you hungry again within 30 or 40 minutes. A handful of walnuts does the complete opposite. The release is slow. The satiety is real. And the downstream effect on your insulin response is measurably better. Walnuts in particular carry an extra layer of benefit worth knowing about. They are one of the richest plant-based sources of alpha-linolenic acid, an omega-3 fatty acid that has been specifically linked to brain cell health and cognitive preservation. They also contain a dense concentration of antioxidants that help defend brain tissue from the slow oxidative damage that accumulates with age. And when you look at nuts through the lens of those 4 brain risk drivers, the impact is broad. They improve blood vessel health. They reduce chronic inflammation markers. They support metabolic stability and blood sugar control. 3 of the 4 underlying processes, addressed simultaneously, by a food that fits in the palm of your hand. Now I want to move to the third habit. And this one targets what I genuinely believe is the single most damaging daily pattern in modern life. Something billions of people do 3 times a day without any awareness of the biological consequences. You eat, and then you sit down. That is it. That is the pattern. And the damage it does over years is extraordinary. Here is what is actually happening in your body after a meal. When food reaches your digestive system, carbohydrates are broken down into glucose and released into your bloodstream. Your pancreas detects the rise and releases insulin to manage it, pushing that glucose into your cells where it can be used as fuel. Under normal circumstances, in a body that is metabolically healthy, this process works efficiently. The spike is moderate. The clearance is quick, and things return to baseline relatively fast. But that is not how most people in the modern world eat or move. Most people eat large, refined, fast digesting meals, and then immediately sit at a desk or settle onto a sofa for the next several hours. The result is a sharp, prolonged spike in both blood sugar and insulin. Not occasionally. 3 times a day. Every day. For years. For decades. And that repeated pattern slowly, consistently grinds the body toward insulin resistance. The cells stop listening to insulin the way they should. The pancreas has to release more and more of it to achieve the same effect. Blood sugar stays elevated for longer after each meal. And the cumulative damage to blood vessels, to organs, to metabolic function builds silently in the background. Now here is where it connects directly to the brain. That same insulin resistance does not stay confined to your muscles and your liver. Research has shown that it develops inside the brain itself. Brain cells that stop responding properly to insulin lose access to their primary fuel. Their function degrades. Their structure becomes vulnerable. And this is precisely the metabolic environment in which the changes associated with Alzheimer's disease are most likely to take hold. This is why the type 3 diabetes label exists. This is what it means in practice. A short walk after eating interrupts that entire chain of events. When your muscles contract during walking, even gentle walking, they can pull glucose directly out of your bloodstream and use it as fuel without requiring insulin to facilitate the process. Your legs become a glucose sink. Active, working, clearing the spike before it has the chance to build. Studies have shown that even 5 to 10 minutes of walking after a meal significantly reduces the post-meal glucose surge compared to remaining seated. The spike is smaller. The insulin demand is lower. The inflammatory burden on your blood vessels is reduced. Every single meal. Every single day. The effect compounds quietly across months and years in exactly the same way the damage compounds when you skip it. 5 minutes after lunch. 5 minutes after dinner. That is the habit. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that requires special clothing or equipment or a changed schedule. Just movement right after eating before the glucose has the chance to spike. And now we reach the 4th habit. I want to be completely honest with you about this one. The first time I encountered the research connecting it to dementia, I assumed I had misunderstood something. I went back and read it again. Then I looked up the supporting studies. Then I looked up the systematic reviews summarizing all of those studies together. And the signal was there every single time, consistent, repeated, and impossible to dismiss. The 4th habit is brushing and flossing your teeth. Properly. Twice a day. Every day. I understand how that sounds in the context of a serious neurological disease. But stay with me because the biology here is genuinely fascinating. Gum disease is not a contained, local problem. Most people think of it as something that affects your mouth and nothing else. But inflamed gum tissue is in direct contact with your bloodstream. Every time you eat, every time you swallow, every time you brush without adequate care, bacteria and inflammatory signals from diseased gum tissue enter your circulation. Not occasionally, constantly, creating a low-grade, persistent inflammatory burden that runs through every system in your body, including the blood vessels that supply your brain. Multiple large systematic reviews have now found that people with significant gum disease carry a meaningfully higher risk of cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease later in life. The association is consistent across different populations, different study designs, and different research groups. But then the science went further. Researchers examining brain tissue from people who had died with Alzheimer's disease found something unexpected. They found traces of a specific bacterium associated with gum disease. Its name is Porphyromonas gingivalis. And alongside it, they found the toxic enzymes it produces, called gingipains, embedded in brain tissue. This was not found in one study. It has been replicated. And it has opened a genuinely serious line of research into whether chronic oral infection may be a direct contributing pathway to neurodegeneration. I want to be precise here. Association is not the same as proven cause. The science is still developing. But the signal is strong enough, consistent enough, and biologically plausible enough that treating your mouth health as part of your brain health strategy is no longer fringe thinking. It is rational. It is evidence-informed. And the cost-to-benefit calculation is almost absurdly favorable. 3 to 4 minutes. Twice a day. That is the entire time investment. And inflammation in your gum tissue begins to respond within days of consistent, proper oral care. The chronic inflammatory signal running from your mouth through your bloodstream begins to quiet down. Your body's overall inflammatory burden decreases. And the brain, that endlessly hungry, endlessly vulnerable organ sitting at the center of everything, gets just a little more protection. For habits. And now I want you to see them as one system, because individually each one is a nudge. A small, quiet, almost unremarkable daily action. But when you map them against those 4 underlying brain risk processes, something important becomes visible. The stairs build the cardiovascular fitness that keeps your brain properly supplied across decades. The nuts deliver the anti-inflammatory fats, the fiber, and the protective compounds that support your blood vessels and your metabolic health simultaneously. The post-meal walk attacks insulin resistance directly, the single metabolic process most tightly linked to Alzheimer's in current research. And the brushing and flossing dampens the chronic inflammatory signal traveling from your mouth into your bloodstream every single day. Together, these 4 habits address all 4 of the major biological drivers of dementia. Every day, simultaneously, in under 30 minutes of total daily time combined. That is not a small thing. Think about what that means across 10 years, 20 years. The version of you that is still sharp, still independent, still fully present in your 80s is not built in one dramatic moment. It is built in these quiet daily decisions that feel almost too small to matter. That is exactly the trap. They feel too small, so people skip them, and the decades pass, and the window that was open quietly closes. Your brain is not failing yet, but it is listening to everything you do right now. Every meal you eat and whether you walk afterwards. Every staircase you take hard or take slowly. Every handful of nuts that replaces a processed snack. Every 2 minutes you spend with a toothbrush before bed. These are not inconveniences. These are investments. And unlike almost every other investment you will make in your life, this one pays out in the currency that matters most. Your clarity, your memory, your presence, the ability to still be fully, recognizably yourself at the end of a long life. Start with one habit this week. Build it until it is automatic. Then add a second. Within a year, all 4 are running in the background of your normal life without effort, without disruption, and without cost. The goal was never to live forever. The goal is to live fully, right up until the very end. Long stretches of sharpness and independence, followed by a short decline, as late as possible. That is what these habits are quietly building toward. One day at a time,